Week 7 of the fantasy football season, and here's running back start sits. This week, the first start, Bijan Robinson of the Atlanta Falcons. So Bijan Robinson the last 2 weeks, I know the numbers haven't been all that great for a running back that was drafted in the first round of fantasy drafts this season. So this week here, pretty tough matchup at a stout Tampa Bay Buck defense. Division matchup, obviously, over there. But Bijan Robinson, we know, is a great talent. If he had a better quarterback in there than Desmond Ridder, it totally would open things up even more. So right now, we'll see if they go to Taylor Heinicke or not. Is this Atlanta Falcon team? Even though I think they should, because Taylor Heinicke can we stretch the field a little bit. We know he's a gunslinger. He does take risks. But anyway, Bijan Robinson, one of the best receiving running backs out of the backfield this season. And even with a quarterback playing poor like Desmond Ridder, he's still been putting up some solid numbers, Bijan Robinson. And I still will start him once again this week. The next start, Aaron Jones of the Green Bay Packers. Aaron Jones, he's missed a couple games this season with a hamstring injury. Week 5, the Packers, they gave him off in that game versus the Vegas Raiders. That he could come back here in Week 7 pretty much 100% after a bye week in Week 6. So this week, a good matchup with the Broncos. They can't stop anyone, even though on paper, coming into the season, it looked like it would be a pretty stout and solid defense. But obviously, that hasn't been the case, and we just saw Isaiah Pacheco tear up this Denver Bronco defense. Aaron Jones, he's a good running back, could receive the football out of the backfield as well. And this Packer run game needs the boost. A.J. Dillon really hasn't done much, and Taylor's been back there as well in the backfield. So this week, Aaron Jones, I expect him back in a good matchup at the Broncos. He's a start. The next start, Isaiah Pacheco of the Kansas City Chiefs. So right now, good matchup versus the Los Angeles Chargers. And this is a potential shootout between these AFC West rivals. So right now, Pacheco, the last 2 weeks, he's running the football well. And this season's definitely been a good year here for Pacheco, where he's got 4 double-digit fantasy games under his belt. So this Chief team, once again, a great record this year, one of the best teams in the league. And Pacheco's added a lot to this running game that they really haven't seen over the last few seasons, going with Clyde Edwards-Helaire and Jerry McKinnon. So right now, Pacheco, one of the better backs in fantasy football in the early going this season. And this week in a potential shootout and a good matchup versus the Chargers, he's a start once again. The next start, Brian Robinson of the Washington Commanders. So Brian Robinson, he just has a knack for the end zone, and pretty much weekly you could pencil him in for minimum 12 fantasy points per week. So this week, a good matchup at the New York Giants, where we know their defense isn't all that good, even though they did hold the Buffalo Bills to 14 points. And you got to give this Giant defense credit in that one, but it could be an NFC shootout between the Giants and the Commanders. Obviously, a big rival, many decades here now between these two teams. So Brian Robinson, obviously the clear number 1 back over there, with Gibson coming in on passing downs here and there, and also change of pace back. So this week, Brian Robinson, it wouldn't be surprising to me if he's a top 10 running back. And to start this week, the next start, Jerome Ford of the Cleveland Browns. So Jerome Ford, he's been pretty decent in a limited amount of touches for the most part. And we saw in last week's game in a tough, grinded out performance versus the San Francisco 49ers. Him and Kareem Hunt pretty much was splitting carries over there and touches for this Cleveland Brown team. So this week at the Indianapolis Colts indoor game, it's going to be way better conditions than it was in a bad weather game in Cleveland. So right now, I think Ford indoors can make some plays. Deshaun Watson, we'll see if he comes back. If not, P.J. Walker, he actually stepped up and they won the ball game, like I mentioned, hanging in there for this Cleveland Brown team. But this week with an easier matchup at the Colts and indoors as well, I think Ford could carve out a top 15, top 20 performance. Number 6, Jonathan Taylor, staying in the same game of the Indianapolis Colts. I know the last 2 weeks, Zach Moss has looked good, and he's been a top 10 running back in fantasy points this season here, Zach Moss. But Jonathan Taylor signed a 3-year, $42 million extension. We know he's missed the first month of the season, and now he's back. And weekly, the touches are going to go up. So right now, I think this week we're going to see 15, 18 touches in this one here for Jonathan Taylor. This defense is solid for this Cleveland Brown team, but Jonathan Taylor was a talented running back. Him and the Colts finally came to an agreement, patched up the relationship, and I think this week here, if they want a chance to win this ball game, they got to grind it out in this one and run a lot in this one. And I think Jonathan Taylor gets on track once again as a start this week, and the final starts Josh Jacobs of the Vegas Raiders. I know Josh Jacobs this season, the numbers haven't been all that great, but he is catching the football more out of the backfield. And we'll see if it's going to be Brian Hoyer or Aiden O'Donnell is the starter in this one. But the Chicago Bears, one of the worst defensive teams in the league. I know they got to travel cross country here, is this Vegas Raider team, but it's going to be a battle of the backup quarterbacks. Justin Fields out as well in this one. So I think Josh Jacobs turned things around in this one. It wouldn't be surprising to me if this is possibly his best game of the season. When it's all said and done this year, he is Josh Jacobs with a good matchup at Chicago, backup quarterback in there, and they're going to have to lean on the run and some dump-offs as well. Now to the hits, Najee Harris of the Pittsburgh Steelers is the sit. Najee Harris, he hasn't done anything all season. Jalen Warren quickly eating into the workload and pretty much could be the starting running back sooner than later for Mike Tomlin and this Pittsburgh Steelers team. And it's a tougher matchup versus the Los Angeles Rams, where their defense over the last few weeks is starting to step up, make some plays, and Aaron Donald's looking healthier as well as the season goes on. So Najee Harris has done nothing all season, like I mentioned, and warrening into his workload. He's a sit for me. Next sit, Jahmyr Gibbs of the Detroit Lions. So Jahmyr Gibbs, it looks like he might be back in this ball game, which is good news. David Montgomery, he's possibly going to be out to Week 10, I believe, where they got the bye week in Week 9. He got banged up with the rib injury in last week's game versus the Tampa Bay Bucks. But right now, tough matchup in Baltimore. Craig Reynolds, I definitely think is going to be a factor in the backfield, even though he wasn't that impressive, his numbers in that Week 6 game with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But anyway, Jahmyr Gibbs, hopefully he comes in 100%. But his ceiling this season's been only 12 fantasy points, where he was getting 9 fantasy points the other ball game. So this week with a tough matchup and not 100% sure if he's going to play or what the workload's going to be, even if David Montgomery most likely going to be out in this one. I'm going to play it safe if you have better options and sit Gibbs this week. Next sit, Alexander Mattison of the Minnesota Vikings. So right now I know San Francisco has injuries on offense. Christian McCaffrey, Deebo Samuel. We'll see if those guys play or not in this game. But Alexander Mattison, for the most part this season's been a non-factor for fantasy football, besides 2 games out of the first 6. So this week a tough matchup with the 49ers, one of the best defenses, if not the best defense in the league. And now this Niner team's going to rely more on their defense. If those injuries are going to be long-term for this roster, where they're going to have to stuff the run and try to make Kirk Cousins beat this team with Jordan Addison and KJ Osborne as his top 2 receivers and TJ Hawkinson at the tight end position. So Madison with a tough matchup, and the stats haven't been all that great, and Cam Akers getting work as well in the backfield since getting traded from the Rams here to this Minnesota Viking team. He's a sit for me. Next sit, Gus Edwards of the Baltimore Ravens. So Gus Edwards, I know he's been the lead back over the last few weeks, or at least in a 50-50 timeshare with Justice Hill, but he's not doing much here as Edwards. You don't catch the ball out of the backfield. He's not finding the end zone. We know Lamar Jackson mostly takes those goal line runs himself anyway. And it's a tough matchup versus one of the better teams in the league in Detroit, where they only gave up 6 points in last week's game. I know this Baltimore offense is better than the Tampa Bay Buck offense, but this Detroit Lion defense is the real deal, I believe, as well. Dan Campbell has these guys playing hard, and this one, they're going to shut down the run game for the most part, I believe. And after the last few weeks, we haven't seen Gus Edwards do anything as well, so he's a sit. Rachaad White's the next hit for me. Matchup versus the Falcons, where they're top 5 in the least amount of fantasy points to running backs on the season. So Rachaad White, I know he can catch the ball out of the backfield, but between the tackles this season, he really hasn't been impressive. And I think this Tampa Bay Buck team, they're going to work in Keyshawn Vaughn a little bit more weekly. And we saw it in last week's game in Week 6 versus the Lions, where he was getting more snaps. He was getting some touches with Keyshawn Vaughn. And Rachaad White, I thought coming into the season, would be a solid number 2 running back option for fantasy owners. But for the most part, besides 1 or 2 games this season, that really hasn't been the case. So this week here in a tough matchup versus division rival, the Atlanta Falcons, he's a sit for me. The next sit, Keontae Ingram of the Arizona Cardinals. Ingram did lead the backfield for the Cardinals in Week 6 at the Los Angeles Rams. 10 carries, 40 yards. He added 2 catches as well in that ball game for 18 yards. But anyway, it's a tough matchup with the Seattle Seahawks. Pretty much made Joe Mixon non-existent in last week's game versus the Cincinnati Bengals. So right here, the Seahawks team, I believe, could get off to an early start. And they're going to have to abandon the run and throw the football a lot. And also Joshua Dobbs, he's going to run for his 30, 40 yards per game for this Arizona Cardinal team. So right now, Ingram, yes, he's the number 1 back, it looks like, with Damian Williams mixed into the mix. And DiMercito, he pretty much was a waste for fantasy owners to go out there on the wire and get, since Ingram came back from the neck injury. But anyway, this week, in a matchup where I don't think it's going to be well for Ingram, I have him as a sit. And the final sit's Javonte Williams of the Denver Broncos. So this week here, tougher matchup versus the Green Bay Packers. And Javonte Williams, I know he led the backfield in touches last week. They were down early and often to the Kansas City Chiefs, was this Denver Bronco team. So right here, Jaleel McLaughlin, I still believe, is going to get touches and third down work, catching the ball out of the backfield. And even Samaje Perine will still get some work as well. So I know it's not really a 3-man committee But all three running backs all got touches in that game with the Kansas City Chiefs, and Javonte Williams in a game where they could be trailing early to the Green Bay Packer team, even though I think it's going to be a close game between these two teams. Williams, he's not 100% with the hip injury over the last few weeks, and then coming off the ACL in the offseason as well. So right now, while over there looks like a committee a little bit, he's a sit for me. So that's running back start sits for week 7 of the fantasy football season.